Good evening. It is absolutely wonderful to be here, and frankly, it's amazing that there are so many people here. It's wonderful. It's exciting for someone who works in education finance. It's not often a very popular topic. It might be dry, but to see everyone here is really exciting, and frankly, gives me hope for what may come in the months and years ahead in terms of education funding here in Georgia. Tonight, as Hillary said, I want to provide you with a little bit of information about some of the work that we have done recently on education funding. We have two reports that came out earlier this fall, one that looked specifically, kind of traced the dollars themselves, and then the second report, which we released last week, looked specifically at what the impact of the shifts in funding have been. Now, just a little background on who we are and who the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute is, so you know who we are and what we do. We are a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. Our job really, as I said, is to follow the numbers and to look at it at the state level. So we're not so much interested in federal policy, but it's what's happening at the state level, and then really considering how do the numbers affect Georgians? Because they're not just numbers on a page. I mean, these are real people in real lives, and so that's our goal, is to understand what's happening to Georgians. Our focus areas, of course, are education. We also look at tax and budget policy. We look at economic security and economic development and health care. And that's just an overview of who we are. Now, as I said, we have looked at education funding and released two reports. And the first report, which is the Schoolhouse Squeeze, came out in September. Most of the data on the sheets in front of you is pulled from that report. The report is available in full on our website if you want additional information. But what we tried to do with that report is to pull really all of the key data on state funding and then all of the key data on local funding and put it in one place, so that people, and that includes our legislators, but parents and everyone else across the spectrum, could really understand what has happened to education funding in recent years. And I think probably the most significant finding that we had from that report was that state funding per student since 2002 has fallen on average 15.3% across the state. So that's the average decline in districts across the state. Here in Cobb County, you surpassed the average. You did better than the average. In Cobb County, it was 16.9% since 2002. And one of the things I think is important to note is while state funding was falling, the needs of your students were increasing. You had more students coming into your schools, and as was the case across the state, the number of economically disadvantaged students grew, and grew significantly. It grew by 21 percentage points here in this county. These are kids that can succeed. They can succeed at very high levels. They generally need some extra support to get there, though. So we have greater needs, but fewer state dollars. One of the consequences of this, as you can see, is there's been a shift in state dollars to a greater reliance on local dollars. And this is true at the state level and it's true at the local level. As the pie charts show, in 2002, the state covered about 56% of the cost of educating Georgia's children. By 2012, and that's the most current data that we have on this particular indicator, 2012, that had fallen to 49%. So we have a greater reliance on local dollars and a greater reliance on federal dollars. And as I said, that is also true here in Cobb County. In Cobb County in 2002, the state covered about 50% of the cost of educating your children. Today, that's 45%. That shift away from state responsibility to local and federal responsibility is likely to continue if nothing changes. And so, again, it's just one of the kind of unspoken structural changes that is underway. Now, what is the source of the funding cuts? And likely many of you are familiar with the phrase austerity cuts. And that's what's gone on. Since, as Hillary said, the QBE, which is the mechanism that the state uses to distribute the the bulk of state dollars back to districts. It's a formula. Since 2002, the QBE has been underfunded. In total, it has now been underfunded to $7.6 billion. That's over the last 12 years. In the past 5 years, it's been underfunded by $1 billion in each of the last 5 years. And so basically, you know, the QBE, which takes all of this data on our students, on the number of students and on their specific needs. So it's what grade levels are they in? Do we have children who are English language learners? Are they in special education? You know, pulls all of this data in and it calculates what each district needs to provide a quality education to its particular students. And the state has not provided that level of funding for 12 consecutive years now. Now, what has happened in Cobb County? You know, $7.6 billion, it's a lot of money over 12 years and over 180 districts. How much does it really matter? It matters a lot. It matters a lot. Here in Cobb County, in the current year, the QBE cut is almost $66 million. So had the QBE been fully funded this year, an additional $66 million would have gone into schools here in Cobb County. What was the average cut per student? It was $599. So here I looked at the enrollment here at Walton High, and this is last year's enrollment. So had the QBE been fully funded for this year, Walton High would have received about $1.5 million more in funding for the students and teachers here. The cumulative austerity cut, as Hillary said, is close to $500 million. And this goes back to 2002, or actually the 2003 was the first year that the austerity cuts were imposed. So this really does have a significant impact on resources. So local funding. The other piece of the puzzle that we looked at with the schoolhouse squeeze was local funding. And here the picture is not any rosier, unfortunately. Between 2008 and 2012, 132 districts across the state, so that's almost 3/4 of all districts across the state, saw a decline in their tax digest. That's the value of the taxable property. And of course, property taxes is the primary source for local revenue. You know, Cobb County was one of those districts. The average decline in property values in these 130 districts was 17.3%. Cobb County, you guys did a little bit better, 17.8% was the decline. That's the next. What has that meant in terms of local revenue per student? Well, in nominal dollars since 2008, or between 2008 and 2012, local revenue has fell 12.3%. You adjust that for inflation, and it's down 17.7%. So Cobb County, like virtually every other district across the state, is kind of contending with a double whammy here. You've got rapidly falling state funding and rapidly falling local funding. At the same time, our student numbers are going up, and across the board, our students are coming with greater needs. And as Hillary pointed out, we are expecting increasingly more of our teachers and more of our students, and a lot of that is policies, and we may think they're good policies, but they're policies driven by the state. So the state is continuing to say, you know, to ratchet up those expectations, but it has not provided the funding to fully implement those policies and to make them sustainable. Whoops, I missed my last bullet there. I did not time it well. The second report that we did, which just came out last week, is called, what is it? Cutting Class to Make Ends Meet. And with this report, you know, we trace the dollars, and that tells us that side of the story. But then the question is, well, so what does this mean to schools and in districts? What are they doing to actually manage these budget cuts? You know, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of them. What we found certainly raises some concerns. Stepping back, I should explain a little bit where these numbers come from. We spent this summer surveying all of the school districts across the state. There are 180 of them. 140 participated in the survey, including Cobb County. These 140 districts enroll 93% of all students in the state. So the survey responses really do speak to what students and teachers across the state are experiencing. Now, kind of jumping into the key findings, and we asked a lot of questions, so not to toot our horn, but in all seriousness, we asked about 24 questions. I'm only touch on the highlights, so you may want to go to our website to see in full what district responses were. But one of the most striking findings was it is no longer normal in Georgia to go to school for 180 days. That is not normal in this state anymore. Nearly 80% of the responding districts are in school less than 180 days. Of course, Cobb County, we're at 175. One of the other striking findings, of course, increased class size. I mean, that's I think kind of a no-brainer. There's been a lot of coverage of that. 95% of the districts that responded to our survey have increased class size since 2009. And of course, tied to that is a reduction in the number of teaching positions. 140 districts since 2009 have cut the number of teaching positions by almost 9,000. Cobb County, you have cut almost 1,400 positions since 2009. That's the connection to class size. You have almost 1,400 fewer teachers in your schools. Teaching positions are not the only positions that are being cut. We also asked about instructional support positions, and these are professional staff. These are social workers, they are school counselors, they are instructional leaders, they are media specialists. They matter. 70% of the districts have cut these positions. Cobb County has cut 113 of these positions since 2009. We have also seen 80% of our districts have cut central office staff. Excuse me, and I know there's a lot of, well, they're bloated and everything, and that may well be true in a couple of districts, but certainly what we are hearing anecdotally from districts is that they are really down to bare bones. And as they are pushing forward with new state policies, we have a brand new teacher evaluation system, which is huge and complicated. We have a new principal evaluation system, which is huge and complicated, and it's high stakes. We have new performance standards in English and math. This is where central office people matter, because they're providing support to school teams, to principals, and those positions aren't there anymore, or they certainly have been scaled back in many districts. I've got to do this timing better. More and more of our districts are relying on reserve funds and to cover basic maintenance and operations. Reserve funds are there for emergencies or unexpected opportunities. That's not true in Georgia anymore. This year, 82% of the districts that were in our survey had to use reserve funds to balance the budget. The year before, I think it was 72%, and in fiscal year 2012, I believe it was 70%. Cobb County is one of 78 districts that has had to use reserve funds for each of these 3 years to make ends meet. And as I've had a number of conversations with superintendents, and it's a big caveat, I've not talked to anyone in Cobb County, so don't make any assumptions about where your superintendent is. But what we are hearing from other superintendents is, they said, we haven't hit rock bottom yet because we haven't completely exhausted our reserves. And that's what they are telling us they are most fearful of, because they are depending on that to cover these gaps. So that's kind of an overview of our 2 reports. And I know that's pretty bleak. And unfortunately, I don't have any cheerier news. I've been throwing a lot of numbers at you, and I'm going to throw some more numbers at you. And this is about the state budget. I think it's really important, if we're going to have a conversation about funding for our schools, to understand the larger context of the state budget, particularly, as I said, if we want more, and to understand where education fits in the current budget. Current budget, looking at fiscal year, we're in fiscal year 2014. And on the one hand, things look kind of cheery, sort of. Revenues are up this year. Revenues are up a little over $500 million over fiscal year 2013. And this, coming out of the recession, this is definitely a positive step forward. The problem is our budget went up by $700 million. So almost every state agency and almost every state program was again cut this year. The only thing that was spared was the QBE and the QBE equalization. Now, what's driving this spending? We're not suddenly creating new programs and shoveling money into it. What's driving this spending is basically inflation and population growth. I mean, it's what I think of as kind of infrastructure needs. The single biggest driver of the increase in the state's budget, enrollment growth in our universities and in K-12. Medicaid and Peach Care, the equalization program, teacher and employees, this is state employees, their retirement. So again, these are basically automatic increases that reflect population and inflation. And that's why everything was cut this year again, except the QBE. So then the question becomes, okay, if we can't pull new revenues, we've got revenues coming up, but if we can't use those revenues, is it possible, if we're looking for additional funding for our schools, can we reallocate dollars from other areas of the state budget? And again, I should just have a little gray cloud over my head. It would be really, really difficult to do so. And I'll show you why, I hope. Education comprises over 50% of the budget. Now, this is the technical college system, this is the university system, and this is K-12. So this is all three systems. It's 51.5% of the budget. It would be really tough to take money from either the universities or the technical college system. State funding for our universities has fallen in half. Technical college system funding has plunged again. Their enrollments are down. It would be very challenging, particularly given the governor's goal of increasing the number of students who actually complete some sort of post-secondary program. This is a diploma certificate, not just a BA. We're kind of the most basic, by increasing it by 250,000, and that's just to meet expected job demands in 2020. We're way far short of reaching that goal. So pulling money from higher ed is probably not the wisest choice we could make. So where do we look at next? Healthcare. That's the next biggest area of state spending, about 21%. Is that an option? Can we move money? Again, it would be very difficult. Just looking at our Medicaid spending alone, Georgia is 50th in Medicaid spending per patient. Since 2009, our Medicaid enrollment has gone up 20%. Our Medicaid funding has gone up 3%. So we're really not in a position to take dollars from health care. And that leaves us then with less than 30% of the budget, and that covers everything else the state does. Everything else that the state does. So that's public safety, transportation, Health and Human Services. I mean, we could eliminate the Department of Human Services. Their budget this year is $450 million. If we're trying to fill in that $1 billion austerity cut, we're not even halfway there. And all of these agencies have been cut, their budgets have been cut 20 to 30% since 2009. They are as lean as they can get. So, and I don't actually say this to depress people, but to lay out, this is the context that we're operating in. And at some point, if we think that we do want to increase funding for our schools, that is an important investment for Georgia to make, we are at some point going to have a conversation about revenues, even if that's difficult. It is certainly true that conversation is happening in districts across the state. Between 2002 and 2012, 121 districts raised their millage rates. They raised their taxes. They had to find a way to fill the hole. In the last year alone, between 2013 and 2014, 38 of the districts that responded to our survey said that they had to increase their millage rates, again, to try to plug the holes from the loss of property values and the continued decline in state funding. So, as Hillary said, we really are at a tipping point, and there's not an easy answer. So that in a nutshell is, I will leave it at that. I was going to talk about reserve funds. There's been some public discussion about reserve funds, and if we can just move funding from reserve funds. Right now, we have 7 days in the bank, the state does. Probably not wise right now to take funding from the reserve funds and redirect it to K-12. And it's not enough. Even if we took it all, it's not enough.